Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to see my great friend and former colleague, Kay Bradley. Kay, super excited to have you here. Why don't we get started by you telling us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to lately?
Well, Chris, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today. I got my start in advertising, but I have spent the last almost 10 years working in sports marketing, team and league side. So once I propelled out of the advertising world, I started at US Soccer, where I spent about 8 years building the marketing and brand function for the US Soccer Federation, for both the men's and women's national teams. And most recently, I am just coming up on my 1 year anniversary at Chicago Stars FC, which was formerly the Chicago Red Stars, which is the women's professional soccer team in Chicago, Illinois.
That's amazing. I love that. And what led you down this path? I mean, if I recall correctly, you actually played soccer in college, right? Tell us a little bit about that and how that maybe influenced where you've landed today.
Yeah, it was not a straight path, I think, as most of us experience in our careers. But I was working in advertising. I was working at an incredible agency here in Chicago called Kramer Krasselt. And I was loving the work that I was doing, but I was also feeling like I wanted to dive in more to the business side beyond what we were able to influence from the advertising, be able to influence more and more. So I actually went back to school and I got my MBA at Kellogg and learned, well, how I would say this differently is I didn't know what I didn't know. So I wanted to understand kind of what the rest of the business world looked like, the business acumen, the other areas of the industry that I wasn't familiar with, so that I could feel confident taking my skill set from the advertising world and bringing it to organizations. And then at that point, I was looking for organizations that I was passionate about. I knew that if I was going to live, breathe, eat, sleep, because that's kind of in my nature, an organization that I wanted it to be something that I really cared deeply about. I had had some experience in. So my work in advertising, I had experience in entertainment and hospitality. And I had experience in sports a little bit. And then, as from a personal perspective, I had experience in sports and playing in soccer in college and every other sport in high school that I could get my hands on. And so, when this opportunity at US Soccer became available, I threw my hat in the ring, and that's kind of where it all started. And it feels very serendipitous that I ended up here, that I was able to marry my passion growing up with now my professional passion, but it was not a straight path. It was actually not anything I anticipated would happen, but I am so grateful for where I am and how it's all started to come to pass.
I love that. I actually reside in Kansas City, and the women's soccer team here has been really transformative for the community and really incredible attendance, their own stadium, which is phenomenal. And it's been interesting to see how the Kansas City market really embraced the sport and is going to host the World Cup at some point here in the relatively near future. So, soccer has really come into its own. I guess we could blame you partly for that because of some of the things you've been doing. I mean, it's much more of a global sport than a lot of Americans realize. What have you done in what, even what you're doing now? What have you done to help the world see it a different way and embrace it, given our kind of natural addiction and the way that we're even socialized to be either a baseball or a football, NFL, or I guess basketball, hockey, the kind of core four. How did you bring it to the level that it is now, which is just so much, it's become a part of regular sports conversation as opposed to an afterthought for those that are maybe international. Those that have traveled certainly know about it a lot more. But tell us like how you've thought about that and helped lift it.
Yeah, and that was the bulk of the work that I was focused on when I joined US Soccer. What we identified through our insights mining and brand studies and all the things that you do when you're trying to wrap your arms around an organization and a brand is that there was this really, really strong core group of fans, and it was really passionate. But the challenge is that it was very insular. And so what we realized, and it was really interesting. The studies that we did showed that obviously every sport has a core avid fan, but the drop off between the soccer avid fan and then the soccer casual fan was much bigger than the drop off between an avid fan and one of the core five and then the casual fan. So, where we spent a lot of our time was trying to open the aperture of the sport and ensure that people who might have an interest, that it was really easy for them to become a fan and to access the sport. And so that was the crux of our strategy. And then that led us down a number of different paths. I mean, I think we were talking earlier when I first jumped on that sometimes it's just the simplest things, like people not understanding the schedule. The big sports here in the US follow a very pretty consistent schedule of when it's going to either be on air, when they're going to have games, and then the time of year that they play. International soccer does not follow that schedule. So even things as simple as educating people on, okay, well, what does the international calendar look like and why is it so crazy? And why does someone like, superstar Christian Pulisic play in the United States for the US team, but he also plays overseas? That doesn't typically happen. And so just some of the basic education, and then also all of the things that we know are so important about sports to bring the casual fans in, the human interest stories, making sure that we're finding those connections with diverse audiences. So we started doing a lot of our work in both English and Spanish. So there's just a lot of tactics that we pursued once we realized that we had a lot of work to do to make sure that we were making the sport welcome and easy to access for those that were on the outside looking in.
One of the things I've observed as well, I've seen the NFL and Major League Baseball and others, kind of classic American sports go international and have exhibitions and trying to expand their base. I felt like, soccer was, I mean, I grew up as a kid in Michigan as a child. We didn't even have soccer as a sport in our small school district until probably 2 or 3 years after I had kind of moved out of the system. And now it's like, on par with football and track and any of the other sports. But I think, the other thing I'm curious to hear your reflection on is how soccer's become a part of pop culture and just common, like, iconic moments in the psyche and the kind of activities of normal life and in a way that's different. Talk to us a little bit about the way you've seen that kind of mature or start to take shape.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think that a lot of brands are finding success right now when they're finding that intersection between culture and their product or their brand. And so a lot of the focus around how do we do that, especially with a product that does for many felt foreign, how do we bring that and bring that connectivity into the United States? So there was a lot of how do we connect soccer to art? How do we connect soccer to music? How are we using pop culture icons here in the US and connecting them in and finding those natural intersections between whether it was our athletes or big event moments to make sure that we're building. The other thing I think is a little bit of a like perhaps a misnomer is that as the US Soccer Federation, we didn't have a lot of resources at the time, especially when I first got there. And that's obviously changing due to the evolution of the game and the organization. But at the time, it was also, we had a really small audience that we were able to reach on our own. So a lot of the work that we were doing is how do we utilize other channels and platforms to expand our reach? And sometimes that was through individuals and influencers. A lot of that was through partnering with other media platforms that had their own audiences. So some of it was through the storytelling and some of it was through finding those cultural connections. But a lot of it was just how do we get our narrative out there in unique ways, using going beyond the paid media model because we didn't have that, and utilizing other resources, whether it was podcasts and or getting on morning shows or connecting into other avenues that we could tell our story through musicians, through artists, etc. So that was a lot of fun, but also really intentional about how we were leveraging those different spheres and different passion points to connect soccer into the more of the mainstream culture here in the US. The other thing I think is really interesting too, because you mentioned about having soccer in your town. Soccer is one of the fastest growing sports in participation, but what we were also seeing is that participation wasn't necessarily translating to fandom. So finding the ways that we could continue that journey for individuals from, okay, I played when I was 5, I quit when I was 12, and then this big chasm. And so how can we utilize the participation to translate that into fandom down the line? And that's been an area of focus as well.
Love it. The role you're in now, tell us about how, when you joined, how you found kind of, the brand, and you said you went through a name change. Tell us a little bit about kind of, the evolution of the way you've tackled the opportunity there to lift the brand and shine a nice light on it and some of the things that as you Now that you've kind of done some of those, what are some of the bigger things you're working on going forward?
Yeah, so we're very much in the middle of the process. So I sometimes we say we're just, even though I've been here a year, it feels like some days we're just getting started. We came in at a point in time with the organization when there wasn't a lot of emphasis on the brand and on marketing. And so I joined at a time when the ownership was transitioning to a new owner. And then we rebuilt the entire leadership team. Rebuilt a lot of the staff, and those that we were existing came on. We crafted the mission and the vision of the organization. So we were pretty much starting from scratch when I joined. And then that has led to the brand evolution, the new mark, the new name, and a new campaign that aligns with that as well. It was really important for us to do all of that work to demonstrate kind of a clear distinction between where the club had been previously, and some of the challenges it had faced historically, and that we are a new organization with a new vision, with a new owner who has a really strong vision and mission for the future of the organization, and to be able to put a line in the sand to say, okay, this is a new fresh start for us. And that's hard, right? Because that with sports, people don't like change, and that's understandable. But it was important for us to acknowledge that and all of the amazing things of the past, but also to signal that there's a new future for us moving forward. And we've had, some really great successes, things that I'm proud of, but we have also a lot more work to do. Last summer, we had an event at Wrigley Field where we were actually able to draw the largest NWSL crowd in history, a record that we still hold right now. The league is moving really quickly, so hopefully, as much as I love holding that record, hopefully for the league that changes quickly, but it changes hands quickly. But that was something that was really important for us as well. Our sport, and from the women's sport perspective, there's still a pretty big gap in equity between men's sports and women's sports. A lot of that I think people hear as like media coverage, and that's really important. The other big gap is infrastructure. And so women's sports teams, enable for them to be able to thrive, need to have their own infrastructure. So you're from Kansas City, you mentioned that Kansas City was one of the first women's specific stadiums, and the impact that has had, not just on Kansas, but also internationally and on the sport, is massive. And so to the extent that we can continue to drive infrastructure growth through women's sports is really important. And that's hard because a lot of the infrastructure for men's sports was publicly funded years and years and years ago. So they've been benefiting from that kind of public subsidy for, 50 years, hundreds of years. And so women's sports are behind, and we're trying to play catch up. But it is just so important. So part of the exercise of playing at Wrigley was kind of the if you build it, they will come model of, hey, we're playing at a stadium that's in the city, that's accessible by public transportation. There is a demand for women's sports. It just needs to be accessible. And we were able to prove that through the actual event, but also through the marketing. And I'm really proud of the work that we did. We worked with Havas here in Chicago. And we built a campaign, helped identify and accentuate the importance of supporting women's sports, and that this notion of, if we have the right infrastructure, we can drive the demand. And really, really proud of that work. We actually won some awards, and we're waiting to hear on some others, the Sports Clio fees. And so just, not that awards are everything, but it is nice to get some recognition for the work that we've done.
Effie's in particular, right? Effie's about effectiveness, and can't overlook the fact that effectiveness is what we're all in this business to do. Tell us a little bit how much of the Caitlin Clark effect is out there, and do you see are there rising stars in the women's soccer space that are kind of doing the equivalent, that are kind of matriculating from the collegiate programs or other programs to the pros? Is that a factor?
Yeah, I think we see it. It's a huge factor. I mean, it's undeniable what Caitlin Clark has done for the WNBA. And I think we've got some work to do on the NWSL side to tell those stories more effectively of our women's athletes. I think there are a couple that have broken through, like the Alex Morgans of the world. And the Megan Rapinos, she broke through for a slightly different reason, but, in terms of her political kind of activism. But, I think that is an area where we as the league and as the clubs can continue to grow that. I think it's really important. We know in sports that there's like a handful of reasons that people, belong to teams and clubs and sports. And some of it is the social aspect and the environment and the event and, being with friends. The other big thing is the connectivity to the athletes. And so if you don't have those icons, if you don't have the Caitlin Clarks or the LeBron Jameses of the world, then it's really hard to make those inroads with fans. And so that's where we're spending actually a lot of our time right now is identifying, who we think those breakout individuals can be. How can we get them the exposure that they need to be able to hit that next level? I think we have some that are, in the community who are starting to kind of bubble up, but that like superstardom power is something that I think we still as a league have an opportunity to unlock, and we'll get there. It's going to take a little bit of time.
But I mean, obviously your kind of way of thinking about it and listening to the audience that you are trying to bring along that would care, it's really smart. A lot of organizations, unfortunately, are so busy telling people what to think that it's like, it's why we get frustrated by ads, right? Or marketing is that it's instead of actually meeting us where we are, it tells us, where people want us or businesses want us. So your superpower is definitely good in that realm. Tell folks like what's your kryptonite? Like what, clear what you're good at. Are there some things that, and this isn't a, you know, interview, like, what are the three things that you wish you were better at? But like, what are some of the, like, I know for me, I'll give you an example. For me, I get frustrated when, as a marketer, that when we bring ideas that are business oriented that can meaningfully adjust this trajectory of and the success factor of an organization, that we get told to stay in our lane, and I don't do well with that, and sometimes it probably hurts us in relationships. But I feel like fighting for what's right is more important than just doing ads, or especially so many agencies are so busy doing lower funnel stuff that it's just annoying. What are some of the things that face that as you kind of work to have the greatest impact that you wish you could do differently, or that you have to rely on other partners to help you kind of get there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we faced at US Soccer, and we're still, and it's probably not unique to us, is the noise, right? I think I am very, and I think this is my brand strategy training that I had from the agency world. I am very hyper focused on understanding what the business issue is, what the problem is we're solving for, and then building the strategic approach, whether that's marketing or other areas of the business, that's going to deliver on that, and trying to stay and keeping everyone aligned and motivated around solving for that. Where we get in trouble, and it's every facet. You have people who are weighing in from all different areas of the business and outside the business, especially because we're such a public brand, that things just come up all the time that are distracting to the core areas of focus. And so it's, oh, what about this? Did you pursue this? What about this? What did you guys think about this? Why aren't you doing this? Let's go do this. So I think I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And so that's one of the things we're trying, like, we're as a leadership team, um, keenly aware of, is what we're saying yes to, but also more importantly, what we're saying no to every single day. And how are we kind of helping to insulate our team? So those that are, whether it's our brand managers and our creatives and that we are insulating them from a lot of that noise so they can do the best work on the things that we think are going to have the greatest impact, and aren't getting distracted by the things that are really time consuming but might not have a big impact, or, aren't time consuming but have no impact. And so that's been the biggest. I think that's my kryptonite, is when people start, like, we have this really strong strategic direction and then people are all over the place, or we're not seeing the results that we think that we should be seeing right away. And there's a quick desire to pivot, and that like crushes my soul, because we know that these things take time. We know that we're I'm a very data driven person, so we're always looking at the data to see, okay, well, what's working, what's not, probably to a fault, but the big picture strategy, that takes time to unfold. And so having the confidence, the trust, the wherewithal to be able to kind of stick to the strategy and stick to the plan and see it through. Because I think the pivoting and the like knee-jerk reactions and the kind of the roller coaster actually has such a bigger detrimental effect, to being able to hit the meaningful goals in the midterm and the long term. So those are some of the things that kind of like crush my soul day to day. But I don't think that's unique to, I think that's obviously part of being a business and having multiple stakeholders, especially in a business like ours that is so public. Everything that we do is scrutinized, whether that's the branding, coaching change, like, everything is out in the public. So it's kind of what we sign up for.
Yeah, I commend you for not only guarding that, but arming your team with that clarity. It's unfortunately not that common. It's pivot has become an excuse for bad strategy on a level that's just astounding, and we see it all around us. I think a lot of times. You talked about being data informed and some kind of classic approaches to gathering insights and really paying attention to the things that matter. Tell us a little bit about a couple of examples, if you have them, areas where you found an insight that was, that you almost stumbled on it, or in a way that kind of came up, and you're like, wait, it wasn't the normal path to the brief, or the insight that you were necessarily pursuing, but you landed on something that was really motivating, and something you could activate.
No, I think that's a great question first, because I think there are so many different paths to insights, right? Like I think sometimes we get hung up on, or as organizations, on needing like the call it professional but formalized approach to mining for insights, and that is very important, especially for bigger organizations that are complex. But I also find that the majority of the insights that have driven kind of I think some of the best creative work, but also a lot of the most effective work, are just those things that you get through, whether it's formal qualitative research like focus groups or informal conversations that you have with individuals. I just went to my high school reunion. I'm not going to tell you what year it was, but there was a student who was speaking on a panel, and she said, I by being here, I've learned to listen to understand, not to respond. So listen to understand, not listen to respond. And I think there's so many of us that go through our daily lives, and we're hearing and then we're just responding. We're hearing, we're responding. That's kind of like how we're built, especially I think in the corporate world. And so just that idea of like just listening to really understand has been some of the most impactful. And I recall, so we did a campaign for Cedar Fair Entertainment when I was at Kramer Crossell here in Chicago. And it was, I mean, I think now it's kind of interesting because it doesn't feel as insightful now that like we're 20 years later. But it was there. So it's a theme park. It was competing with Six Flags. It's competing with Disney. It's competing with, all of these massive, like kind of roller coaster thrill parks. And so we just drove up there, spent the day. And what was really interesting as we started to speak to parents, as we started to experience it ourselves, is this idea of, well, the thrill is great. That's at the core, right? But that's kind of the table stakes across all of these parks. And there's all these arms races of needing to build the next biggest coaster and come out with the biggest stats around your coaster. And that's where Cedar Fair was at. They were actually just about to bring in a massive coaster that would top Six Flags. When we went there, and what we were understanding, and I think the other piece of this, not to go into too much detail, is like where the revenue is coming from. So the single day ticket, kind of the thrill rider, that's great. But where the security and where the bigger revenue comes from are the season ticket holders, those that pay for families and they do multiple visits. And then that gives security against weather threats because you can't control the weather. So we were there to understand the audience that was buying the season passes. And we were there, they liked the coasters, so that obviously needed to be there. But really, it was the parents who were buying these as a way to connect with their family and their kids. And the thing about when you go to an amusement park is, just by the nature of being at an amusement park, you have to put your phone away. You can't. Whereas when you're on a beach with your kids, or you're, in the car with your kids driving, or any of these other, activities that you can do as a family, it's very easy to take out your phone and do social media. When you're at a theme park, you actually literally have to take your phone away because it'll fall out of your pocket on a ride. So we were talking to these parents about this idea of the connectivity that they have. And it's similar to like if you go on a ski vacation, like that kind of more significant connection. And it was that kind of triggered this idea. And then as we dug into it more, we learned around the kind of actually what happens from a, psychology perspective, and what happens biologically with your body when you're on rides and thrill rides, that there's a chemical that's released, oxytocin, oxytocin that connects you closer with those that you're going through that thrilling experience with. So it was just kind of all adding up, and it led us to this campaign called Thrills Connect, which was really about how do you use the amusement park environment to demonstrate the connections that it creates among, whether it's families or other people that are meaningful to you. So that was one that I think was just, I always think back on that too, because it was also just so serendipitous that we got this insight from being there, and then we were able to connect it from kind of more of even a neurological perspective, which marries, I have a psychology background, so it's kind of marrying all of the aspects. And that was something that was really successful with it for us. In fact, through that, we actually ended up convincing or recommending to Cedar Fair that they don't bring in that massive coaster that they were going to invest in, because it was going to disrupt the ability for families to enjoy the park given the way that it was situated. And they made that choice based on some of those insights. So it was really exciting, like, hey, this is leading some great creative work or fueling some great creative work, but also, to your point, making some, business decisions that were based on how do we create an environment where people can connect even better, while still having the thrills, but not necessarily joining that kind of coaster arms race, if you will.
Yeah, so that's great. I find that some of the work that I'm most proud of has such a simple strategic underpinning. So much so that the team, when you first kind of get to it and start talking about it, people are like, oh, come on. And it's like, wait, give it a second here. And, you know, like one of the great filters I've always used for good strategy is if it starts to evoke thoughts of the way the work can come to life naturally versus it becomes hard to imagine. Like I always get frustrated when I remember working on banks, which it's regulated, it's commoditized, it's really the sea of sameness on some level. So how do you find that distinction and that room to let an idea come to life? And in many cases the idea that's really right before you that can be distinct and super simple really is what magically kind of lifts everything and allows it to breathe. So tell us a little bit about how you go digging and like what are some of your things that you do when you're like, I need to puzzle a strategic thing. I'm working on this next, so it sounds like you've got a fairly comprehensive plan, but within that, I imagine you've got some tentpole things that are, in the future. As you start to think about those, tell us a little bit about how you go about puzzling the mental calculus of getting to the right insights.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think, and this is going to sound, this might go into your like simple, stupid category of like just no brainers. But for me, it's understanding what the challenge is that we're solving for. Like, if we can pinpoint that, then the rest follows. I think that's the hardest part, is understanding what, as an organization or a brand, that we're trying to overcome or we're trying to solve for. And so that really is the underpinning of the whole process for me, because it's like, okay, if we're trying to solve this challenge, then this is the audience that we are going to need to go source the information to understand, how can we connect with them, or how are we going to resonate with them, or what do we need to provide for them to motivate them to do XYZ behavior. And so to me, it starts with that, and then it just starts to unfurl. And that, to me, like understanding which audiences, I mean, in some ways it's really simple. I mean, from a revenue perspective, if we need to get to this revenue, milestone as an organization, and these are our revenue streams, and then these are the things that are, and the people that are going to drive these revenue streams, then these are the actions that are going to get us there, then it's really understanding how do we motivate that behavior, or how do we drive those actions. And then it's digging, right? It's, I'm at a place right now where I don't have the luxury of very large budget. So a lot of it is down and dirty. We just did a focus group with a girls soccer team the other day where we just, showed up with some swag and had some really candid conversations. In my past life, I've had the luxury of broader brand studies and quantitative research. So to me, it's less about the tool and more going into the information gathering on knowing what you're trying to understand, and then building whether it's the facilitation guide or the survey or whatever, or this, the social listening exercise or whatever we're doing to help identify that. I think where people get into a lot of trouble is where they're like, okay, we just need a brand survey, or we just need, we need to do social listening in it. And to me, I've done a lot of those big research projects where you end up with a bunch of insights, but no actionable business results because you didn't go in knowing what you were trying to solve for. So that's been a big learning for me. And then being able to to scale that or scale it up or down depending on the timeline you have, because sometimes you have all the researchers in the world, but you have 2 weeks to get to the idea.
Right.
And then sometimes you have, no, you have all the time in the world, but no budget. And then mostly it's somewhere in between. So I'm trying to figure out how to scale that up or scale that down. And then also educating those around you about the process. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in my career is that 75%, maybe 60% is doing the work, and 40% of it is educating people around me around like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What insights are we going to get? How's that going to impact? How is the work what work we're doing and what that's driving? So I spend a lot of time, probably more time than most, but either building internal decks or kind of internal, more informal presentations to really educate people on what we're doing and why, because I found that to be worth the extra work to be able to ensure that we're getting that strategic alignment. And then as we're building the trust as a marketing team to go do the things we know we need to do to move the business.
One of the things we don't have any clients, I don't think anybody does anymore, that has plenty of money. So there's always a money conversation. But interestingly, we find that the real opportunity is really stepping back and thinking about every touch point that you can affect. Because it's astounding how, the simple things like what's the format of the ticket? How easy is it to find your way to where your seat is? How does that then orient to where the restrooms might be or where you parked? It's funny how with so many brands that we work with, we literally, sometimes we call it a day in the life, but really watching the people we're trying to provide an experience or, an interaction that's meaningful. Even with commodities, how do you step back and see that through the eyes of the user for everything they do? And to be mindful of that, it's really always a rich opportunity. And if you do those things really, really well, then everything you spend after that pays dividends, right? And it's accretive. And frankly, the organization, it's less about how to help people understand why you're doing and what the importance of it is. They see it, they feel it, they feel connected to it. So one of the things that's hardest about being in marketing is so much of it is subjective. You know, Working with the team you've got and then any agency, what advice would you give people about how to evaluate work?
I wish someone would give me some of that advice. I don't know if I've cracked that yet. I am and I don't know if this is I've talked to people who feel very strongly or who strongly disagree with this approach. I am very metrics driven, and that doesn't just mean the immediate. And I'm very specific about here are the short term immediate things we can impact. Here are the indirect things that we will impact. And here are the things that we will impact over the longer term. And being really specific about that, because I think, as you know, people get very fixated and focused on the short term, immediate, direct impact. And so identifying for people that, hey, yes, there's this, but there is our role, especially because I think as marketers, we are partially kind of driving our own initiatives. We're also servicing the rest of the organization, especially as like a creative function too. We're servicing other elements and aspects of the organization. So to make sure that it's clear like what we are servicing and how we are impacting, whether for us. So for in the sports world, it's, partnerships are very key to our growth. Media rights deals are really key to our growth, attendance, and then to a lesser extent, the retail landscape. So those are the big drivers. So showing very explicitly from the plan, even when we're building the plan, these are the things we think this is going to affect, or we're anticipating it's going to affect. And it's not all the immediate impact. It's not all just the social engagements or the social followers or the ticket revenue that's coming in each week. But there are these other buckets, going back to educating, just trying to ensure that people understand that, so that when we are deploying those dollars, there's an appreciation that some of this is either going to take some time, or some of this you're going to see in another area of the business or aspect of the business that might not intuitively feel like it's connected directly to marketing. I think I still have learnings there and how to do that even more effectively. And then I think some of it is, to your point, just just painting the vision. And we're all human, right? So I think, like, when I'm speaking to, whether it's our board or in this case now our investors, I think people want to be moved. They want to be moved emotionally. And so being able to show, I get a lot of flack, well, we don't need that fancy deck. And I'm like, actually, we do. Like, or that fun, like, we do a lot of like clips and things like that in the decks just to get people to feel what we're trying to accomplish. And sports are emotional, sports are joyful, sports are an escape from your everyday. So being able to express that even in the internal work we do, I find to be a tool that's really helpful, even if it takes the extra, hours to, or time to create something that's real, that is emotive, because people want to feel that. And then when they feel that, I think they can start to kind of, whether it's like rational or not, but they connect to that emotion to kind of the asks that you're making from a financial perspective.
So as we look to the months and weeks ahead, you said we're mid season. What should we expect from the Chicago Stars, and what can we say to the fans and the on the fence fans that we want to invite into the club? What should they be aware of that they may not know yet?
Well, big things coming. So I unfortunately things that I can't talk about just yet, but part of the new leadership and ownership is really about how do we relaunch this club for the next generation of fan here in Chicago. And we talk about how do we build Chicago's next sports legacy. Chicago is a town that's steeped in sports legacy, and that will always continue. However, there's white space for a team to come in and really speak to that next generation fan. And so that's where our focus has been. We have some announcements upcoming that we think is going to galvanize the fan base, and we're going to continue to chip away and make those connections in the community. Some of the feedback that we heard is that the Red Stars, now Chicago Stars FC, didn't feel like it was Chicago's team. And part of that is just distance from the city and where we play. But part of that was, to your point earlier, about connecting into the cultural zeitgeist of the city. And our players, a lot of our players don't come from here, which is normal in sports. But I don't think the previous, or I said that previously, that the work had been done to have those athletes front and center in our city, to engage them, whether from the fun stuff and the big events to also the really important stuff and community and giving back. And so we're focused on how do we integrate our athletes into the city, how do we integrate our brand into the city so that it feels more like Chicago's team. And so we've got some work to do there. We're starting down the path, but admittedly we've got a job ahead of us, a big job ahead of us to do that and to kind of ingratiate our club and team into the city. And so people really do feel like, we're as much of Chicago's team as the Bulls or the Blackhawks or the Cubs, and to start to build that legacy. We know you can't build that legacy overnight, but we need to start to put the seeds down so we can start to grow that over time. And so that's what we're focused on. And, I think, a lot of the discussions we're having are around infrastructure, where we're going to play, where we're going to train. And so we have a lot of conversations around, hopefully someday building a stadium of our own. The impact that the Kansas City has had in having a women's specific stadium on the fan experience is really important, but then also on the business and being able to own something that then can be commercialized is really important. So we haven't gotten there yet, but that's something that's very much on our radar of how in the future we continue to pursue that as an option for the Stars.
The thing that I think was missed in the media in the last 24 hours is that Pope Leo is definitely a fan of the Chicago Stars. I don't know how they missed that, but I just want to make that clear because they kept talking about this baseball thing, and I guess they cleared up some mystery there. I think they missed the point to say that he's very much a fan of the Chicago Stars. Um, I don't know. I mean, they just got to catch up to it, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. I mean, I think that's like some of the underlying challenges that we face as a women's team. I mean, you'll hear on the media that, drive into work and they'll say, "Oh, the Cubs had a horrible loss and the White Sox played and they had a bad game." And then that's it, when like we
Right.
were in a championship game that we won. So there is work to be done. I think we just started a relationship with a new media rights partner in Fox. And so that's one way that we are trying to change the kind of the media landscape here in Chicago. We also have a great partner in Marquee Network. And so we're trying to kind of chip away at it. But yes, that kind of just is that one example sticks out but as like a microcosm of the bigger challenges that we face as a women's sport that, it's just going to take time and chipping away at it to get us to overcome.
So, as a closing question, this is a complete random, random thing. Kay Bradley, the movie. What's the Kay Bradley movie? Like, so you're famous. You've done all these amazing things, which you have. What's the Kay Bradley movie that's coming out in the year ahead?
That's a good question. It's been really interesting. I think the reason I think I struggle with this is you see it. It's very easy for me to talk about my work. It's very easy for me to talk about marketing. Less easy for me to talk about like my personal, the personal aspect of me and something I'm working on. I think that as I grew up in the advertising industry and particularly sports, as a woman in particular, I was very conscientious to keep my kind of personal, especially as I was one of the very few new moms within the organization, to keep that very distant from the organization I was working with, so that whether it was in my own head or not, but so that I wouldn't be perceived as not being as capable or not being able to keep up. So one thing that in the last years at US Soccer, as we started to grow as an organization, I have started to kind of bring more of my personal self to work. It was actually really interesting. I had a conversation with one of my employees where she was really candid about how she felt like I needed to step up in that area because we had a lot of young women who were joining our team. We had a lot of young moms, and she felt like that she knew some of that stuff because I confided in her, but I was not very public about it. And she felt like that was a miss. And that stuck with me. And so something that I'm trying to be better about with US Soccer was hard because a lot of our work was on the road and we traveled internationally. And so I never brought my kids. And whereas I think the transition here at the Stars has been good for that. I bring my kids to the game, and I'm trying to let my staff see what it is to be human and everything, especially because it's messy. It's really messy, as as a dad, and it's okay. And so that's something that I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but it is around kind of, I think, that the movie of like being okay to be more of who I am and to share more of that. For those who know me, I'm kind of quirky. I'm kind of goofy sometimes. I'm a mess. I'm always late, like in my personal life, never at work, but always in my personal life. And so just not being afraid I'll still be on time, but not be afraid to show some of those the messier side of things. And also to be open about the fact that I can do what I'm doing, not always well, but I can do what I'm doing and be a mom at the same time and navigate that, as many of us do. It's not unique to me. And so that's something I'm working on. I'm getting better at it. But I think my movie would then include both my professional, but also kind of what it looks like to be a really, really messy career woman in today's
I love that. I mean, I want to commend you not only for your acknowledging that, but like putting time and effort into it because it's hard. And it's amazing how many, the kind of thought leadership out there around work life as separate. I mean, we're humans, whole humans all the time. And when the phone rings and it's one of my kids, I'm going to answer it. And I will tell you, hey, I need to take this and this is why. But I will also give anybody else that grace. And in fact, and happily, but it's something that, we've got to get better at. Instead of worrying about, is it work from home or work from office? We need to how do you be present and meaningfully contribute to life holistically? And that's really, where it needs to be for everybody. But it's harder too, in the different sectors in particular. So that's great. So we're going to have you back as a guest again in the future. And then I want to hear the title of the movie. So this will give you time to craft it and to work on it. And I know it's going to be a series. So it'll be like, it'll be the next generation of the Marvel, with a sports theme. I love it. But thank you, Kay, so much for all your time today. I've always enjoyed being around you. And the thing my wife actually asked me last night, how would you describe Kay? And I said, well, I don't know Kay as well as I'd like to, but I've always found her like super inquisitive and like really a student of like human nature. And you talked today is proof of that I was right. And I love that. And thanks for all you shared. I can't wait to have you back again in the future. And I also can't wait to see the big things that are coming for the Chicago Star. So I'm really glad you're there doing such interesting work, and congrats on everything.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to catch up, and hopefully you'll make it out to a Kansas City game sometime soon.
Indeed, I will. All right. Thanks, Kay.
All right. Thanks, Chris.